You're listening to the Headless WP podcast, where we discuss all things Headless WordPress. The Headless WP podcast is a production of the WP Engine Developer Relations team. If you're interested in more content on Headless WordPress, check out developers.wpengine.com for blog posts, tutorials, videos, and more. What's up? Welcome to the Headless WP podcast. I am joined today by Jason Bahl and my co-host, Fran and Jeff. So Jason Bahl is a principal software engineer at WP Engine, and he should be a man that really needs no introduction, but he leads the open source efforts around the WPGraphQL project. And Jason's been a huge advocate for Headless WordPress really since I first heard about this term back in 2016. And I'm sure he was banging on the drums even earlier than that. And so the benefits of his work can be felt by pretty much everybody in the ecosystem. And he's here today to talk about several features that he's been working on for WPGraphQL that should help developers build faster and more reliable sites. So Jason, Fran, what is happening?
What up?
Thanks
for having me.
Yeah.
We're pumped, man.
I'm always stoked as usual, but this is super stoked because for our listeners out there, Jason's one of my, not only my favorite developers, but he's one of my favorite people. And I just wanted to share a funny kind of story that I just knew. I was like, man, Jason Bahl is badass. So the first week he worked at WP Engine, he knew I followed him on Twitter already because of WPGraphQL and our love for that awesome plugin. But he sends me this link to his impersonation of Chris Farley in high school, and I'm like, oh yeah, this guy's.
Was it Matt Foley?
Had a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
Oh,
nice.
It was hilarious.
And now everybody wants to live in a van down by the river.
By the river, yeah.
I got a couple on there Saturday Night Live sketches from when I was a senior in high school. We did the Matt Foley one. I did the Will Ferrell cheerleading at the chess tournament, and then Will Ferrell as Robert Goulet singing, whatever Notorious B.I.G. songs and whatnot. So.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I got a Jason Bahl story too. Jason's actually the reason that I work here at all.
Oh.
So, and he probably doesn't even know it. So I started following Jason, I guess, back in I'll say the early days of Headless, right after the REST API got merged into core and when it sort of became, I want to say like a fad for a second, but it became well known that this was a thing to do. And I'd sort of been doing Headless development since that point and just really struggling with all the sort of pain points. And I was like, but there's something here, like this is useful. And I think it was around the time that like Faust launched, the first version of Faust, and like Atlas sort of came onto the scene, and Jason tweeted out like, hey, we're hiring this dev advocate position. People should come apply. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm cool enough to work with Jason Bahl. And so lo and behold, here I am. So thank you, sir, for putting that on the Twitterverse, because I might not be here if not. So
yeah, I didn't know my tweet started there. That's cool, man.
Yeah. For sure.
So I'm going to kick it off with the first question because I think Jason's been on the podcast before, but we have like a whole new listener set and audience here, Jay. So before we dive into the nitty gritty of what our topic is today, WPGraphQL Smart Cache, y'all, download it. For our new listeners, can you give us a quick background on what you did before GraphQL and tech as a whole?
All right. So before tech, I did a lot of stuff. I worked. My first job was refereeing soccer as 14-year-old refereeing youth soccer. So got that in the bag. And then first, I'd say real job, I worked at KFC Taco Bell, so doing the fast food thing. And then delivered pizza for a little bit, worked at a hotel front desk for a little bit, then in college, I went to college. I actually studied photojournalism in college.
Oh, cool.
Taught myself how to build websites so that I could show my photography portfolio. And then I worked at a bank while I was in college, and had a coworker at the bank who I was seriously considering changing my major in college from photojournalism to like finance or something and like pursue banking. But a coworker I was working at the bank with, he's like, you realize not everybody can build websites like you do. Like you should pursue that. So he encouraged me to check that out. So I found a job as a webmaster back then. Just like basically entering content into a CMS. So the job posting, was for WordPress. I experienced WordPress just on one project. I had a cousin who wanted a website and was like, hey, I built Flash. My photography portfolio was all in Flash back in the day. So like I learned Flash and ActionScript, and my cousin was like, oh, you build websites. What can you build me a Flash website where I can enter the content? And that's when I discovered WordPress, because I was like, oh, like Flash is all kind of like, at least my experience was like very hard coded type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But you could feed XML into Flash sites. And so I did some research and I was like, oh, there's this CMS called WordPress. I didn't even know what the term CMS was at the time. But it had what's called an XML RPC API. And so I built something just to show my cousin, like, yeah, it's possible you could use this system to enter content and I can have it show up on this other thing, which was a Flash front end at the time. So I didn't even know I was getting into headless WordPress at the time.
Oh,
I don't think
so. Wait a minute.
The word headless WordPress was a thing.
That's wild.
That is absolutely wild.
Yeah, I found WordPress through the XML RPC API. I didn't end up actually building anything like really other than an experiment with the XML RPC API and Flash. But I found WordPress and I was like, holy smokes, this is like the future of the web.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was telling my wife, I was like, I'm still working at the bank at this time. And then so I started building a site. If I asked my church if they wanted me to rebuild their website, which was really old at the time. So that they're like, sure. So I built them a site. Then my coworker at the bank was like, hey, you should pursue this as a career. Found a job as a webmaster. They used WordPress. I didn't know how to write PHP at the time. I was just editing content. But then I found the need to make my job easier. I was like doing a lot of repetitive tasks, and I was like, man, it'd be cool if I could just click one button and have this thing happen. So I learned PHP and learned how to build WordPress plugins. And then from there, I joined up with two guys I grew up with, and we started an agency for a little bit. We're building this back when like mobile was first taken off. So we had one side was design. They had custom QR codes. And then I built like a bunch of mobile landing pages for folks. So like, we had like Disney and Taco Bell would print they'd print like QR codes on billboards or whatever. And as you're driving by, you'd scan it and take you to some landing page. So we were doing a lot of mobile stuff. And then we had like 12 employees at one point, but then we weren't making that much money. So when my wife and I were pregnant with the kid, I was like, I need a real job. So I bounced around some agencies for a little bit, building just normal WordPress sites for a while. Ended up at a newspaper. We did a lot of content syndication. That's where WPGraphQL was born. Nice. We were moving data around the web, and the REST API was causing us more problems than it was helping us with. So that WPGraphQL came about to solve some problems at the newspaper I worked at, and then I pursued it as a community project, and here we are.
Yeah, and the rest is history.
The rest is history.
That's wild to me that your first introduction to WordPress was like through the XML RPC API. Like that's just crazy. It's full circle. Started decoupled, end decoupled,
dude.
Yeah, it's always been in my mind, like, man, like, I don't know, WordPress to manage content and whatever you want to display it. Like, as soon as I, like heard about React Native, I was like, oh, cool. I want to build a native app, a native iOS app with WordPress content. Like whatever it is, I've always wanted like WordPress to be the CMS, but whatever I wanted to present the data.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a flexible pattern. I think that's why so many people are drawn to it. Like, and certainly why I was, because I was exactly the same thing. I was like, look, I don't want to learn another CMS, and like, frankly, all the other ones are expensive, like $500 a month or something, and like that wasn't getting
really. That's a lot.
I mean, some of them, yeah. Like I was just reading something that like Webflow cost $65,000 after 10,000 content pieces on Twitter. And so if people from Webflow are listening and that's wrong, like gently correct me. But
okay.
According to the Twitterverse, that's how much it costs. Like that's insane. And I worked in higher ed, so like that was never getting approved. And we already had WordPress. So it was like I could make whatever I wanted on the front end and just power with WordPress.
I've seen some.
I did just remember my actual first project, my first Headless project. Again, I don't think it was coined Headless. So I showed my cousin the thing in Flash, but then the first job I had where I was working at a nonprofit, there's a Jewish community center in Denver, and they hosted like what's called the Maccabi Games. It's like the kind of Jewish Youth Olympics.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And so like hundreds of athletes from around the country come, and we had events all around Denver. And so I built there was the plugin, a WordPress plugin that predated what became the official REST API. It was from the team that I think worked on
when it was still in
Museum of Modern Art. I think it was the Museum of Modern Art developers that created it. And it was before that plugin, the one that Ryan McHugh created. There was a one before that. It was just called like WPJSON or something. I can't remember, but it was before the one that became official. And so I used that plugin to expose data, and I built the Flash front end, and we had TVs at all the events that had the Flash site loaded, and it just rotated through scores. So like folks would phone in. I was sitting at a desk and they would phone in scores. I would enter the scores, and this Flash, it was like this animated Flash thing that showed scores, and then it would rotate through all the events so parents could see the scores with the different events.
That's cool.
That's wild.
Like a ticker tape. Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. It was like this. I bought a Flash template from ActiveDen, which is like the same, which is now, or it was FlashDen at the time, I think, and now it's ActiveDen and part of ThemeForest and Vado or whatever. And I use that template to feed data from it was a JSON plugin at the time from WordPress. And I would just enter data in the CMS, and it would just rotate through, fetch new data, and put it into we had TVs at all these events. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is wild. And I can still remember how excited I was when I found that the first semi-official REST API plugin. Because I think at that point in my career, I'd kind of like put WordPress to the side a little bit. And I was like doing more Node and Express, and I was working for a dev shop where there was like Microsoft, so we were using C# and .NET and stuff like that. And I hated that. But I remember stumbling upon that, and I was like, "Oh wow!" This all of a sudden just made this relevant for me again, and it was so cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's dig into Smart Cache a little bit. So that's definitely why we're here, is to talk about the work you've been doing on this Smart Cache plugin. So you think you could give us kind of a high level overview of what that plugin does and what it optimizes before we dig into like the technical details about it?
Yeah, for sure. So. The idea with the plugin is, when you're using GraphQL, like one of the drawing features of GraphQL is that it gives the client or the consumer a lot of control in what they ask for. So you can design your queries kind of however you want. You can ask for posts or users or pages or a mix of, the things. Super flexible. You get typed responses back. So really cool. Right now, most folks are doing post requests to a WordPress server. And that means every time a request is made, it has to go all the way to WordPress, execute all the functions that are required to resolve the request, and then you get a response. And so you have to wait for WordPress to load, you have to wait for plugins to load, you have to wait for everything to happen before you get a response. So the idea with Smart Cache, we have a couple layers, but the idea is that we prevent most of that execution from happening and get you a response faster. That's the gist of it, is like making WP-GraphQL faster is like the short of it. But it's also a balance of speed and accuracy, right? Like you don't just want fast data, you want to make sure the data that you're asking for is also up to date. So we're solving both of those problems. Like how can you have your data fast, but also accurate?
Okay. That's all. Yeah, and that's, I think from an overview level, that's a perfect way to summarize that. Now let's dive into like the nitty gritty stuff, Jason. Like, so my blog post just came out, and thanks for helping me write that. Without your help, I would have been, because there's a lot of layers to this thing, right? Especially when you're reading the README on your GitHub for the repo for Smart Cache. But let's start with how the READMEs lay out. Let's start with the network cache as far as from the feature and functionality. Can you explain to us how that works?
Yeah, so network cache, like basically any managed WordPress host or even self-hosted WordPress sites these days put some sort of network cache in front of their WordPress instance. Common one is Varnish, but it could be something else. Like Fastly is a service for this type of thing now. It could be whatever you want. But Varnish is a popular one. Basically, the way that works, and if you go visit pretty much any WordPress site, just normal non-headless WordPress site, first time a user hits the page, it will actually produce the page in WordPress. It'll go to the database and create all the data, then return a template, and that page is going to be cached in Varnish or something else at the network level. So at your host's network cache layer. And then all future users that are visiting that same page aren't actually loading WordPress. They're just getting a cached response. So, one user has to pay the price of building the page, and then everybody else is just getting a really fast response. So with WPGraphQL, we're doing the same thing. And that's like, if you go in your browser, it's called a GET request, right? An HTTP GET request. We're like submitting forms as usually what's called a post request. And that's more dynamic. And most hosts are not going to cache post requests because you're doing dynamic stuff. So a lot of folks using GraphQL today are doing post requests. And so it's bypassing network caches. WPGraphQL supports GET requests, and it has for a long time.
Okay.
Probably 4+ years or something. Mm-hmm. Like it's been quite a while that it's supported GET requests. The problem though is that a lot of network or a lot of hosts will cache GET requests for just an arbitrary amount of time. Like WP Engine by default will cache a GET request, I think, for 10 minutes. I think WordPress VIP does the same. It's like 10 minutes. So if you do a GET request, your data is going to be cached for 10 minutes. That's just kind of
and that would apply to REST API requests as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
For good or bad, whether you want it cached or not.
Okay. Yeah. So that kind of already worked. Like you could have, if you wanted to, you could have switched your GraphQL consumer from post to GET request, and you would benefit from network cache already on a lot of hosts. Some hosts might not support it, but many hosts will. Mm-hmm. The problem though is that you're just gonna have to wait for X amount of time until you get fresh data. And so WPGraphQL Smart Cache adds an invalidation layer that tracks events in WordPress. So it does two parts. WPGraphQL core analyzes queries that are executed, and it returns a list of headers about the request. So if you query a list of posts, it will return a header that says that you queried for a list of posts, and then it will also return each post ID that was fetched, the universal GraphQL node ID.
Okay.
So it will return this metadata, and this is where managed WordPress hosts come in. For WP Engine, our Varnish layer reads those keys. It caches the GraphQL request, but it tags the cache with those keys. So if I query for a list of posts, it's going to tag my cache response that I queried for a list of posts, and then it's going to tag it with each node ID that was returned. And then WP GraphQL Smart Cache tracks events like editing posts or publishing posts or deleting posts, or all sorts of nuanced events. Like if you have a user in your system that has never written a blog post and they publish their first post, that's an event that would transition the user from being a private entity to a public entity, because users are private in WordPress by default, but published authors are public in WordPress. So there's a lot of nuanced events, and WP GraphQL Smart Cache tracks those events in regards to what's public and private. and then it will send out a purge event that will purge any caches that are tagged with like node IDs or list of posts, for example. So if you publish a post, it sends out a purge event to purge any caches that had a list of posts in it. If you edit a post, it sends out a purge event to purge any caches with that particular post ID. So now it's a balance of, users can create their queries, and if they do a GET request, it'll hit the network cache. If it's not cached yet, it will go to WordPress, fulfill the request, cache it at the network level, and then future users will just hit the varnish cache. So you'll get a cache response immediately. Your WordPress server isn't loading every time to get the data. Yeah. But when you do something like publish a post, it'll evict only the relevant cached queries that it needs to. So it's a balance of, fast response times, alleviating your WordPress server load, but also getting accurate data.
Okay, cool. So, let's dig into two things there. So like, let's back up one step and maybe like, what do you think like the need for this plugin is? Like we mentioned, like having the trade-off between speed and accuracy, but also just like, like what are people running into that maybe like led you to develop this thing in the first place?
Sure. So there's a common trend, I guess, in headless WordPress right now between like Gatsby and Next, especially, where these headless clients are like trying to fetch a lot of content from WordPress. Mm-hmm. Gatsby especially, and Next, it kind of just depends on how you're building your Next site. But there's a pattern where like Next has for static generation, they have get static paths function, mm-hmm. where you tell your next site which paths to pre-build basically. And there's a common pattern where folks are fetching basically their entire database and building a list of paths and then statically generating every single possible page they can. And so with that, Next, it does that initial query to get all the things. And Gatsby does the same thing. It fetches basically your entire database. Of public.
And it does that all inside this. You're seeing people do that all inside this get static path. So instead of just getting the URIs or whatever, they're getting everything all in one go.
Well, so you'll get the URIs usually, but what happens though, so you get static paths, it gets the list of paths, but then Next use that list to actually build every page. And usually every page has another query to get the information for that specific page. So let's say you had 1,000 paths for Next to build. It's going to do the one query to get a list of 1,000 paths, but then it's going to do 1,000 more queries against your WordPress server to build all 1,000 pages. So it's almost like a DDoS attack on your WordPress server. And so with that, if it's a post request, every time you run that, it's going to make it all the way to the WordPress server and overwhelm your server. With caching, the first time you run it, it's still going to hit your server, but caching in place, you could keep rebuilding and rebuilding and rebuilding. And most of the time, it's going to be a cache response. So you benefit from that. I would recommend, if you're using Next, that you don't build your entire site. Build some critical pages with get static paths, and then use incremental static regeneration. That's a whole nother topic we could get into some other time.
Yeah, and Fran did a really good write-up of that too that we'll post with this. Because there's some ideas in there.
Yeah, so for that use case, it allows you to build your headless front end with GraphQL queries, and then you can use like incremental static revalidation. You can set a low timestamp, and so Next can try and revalidate your page with a GET request, and most of the time it's going to get a cache response from Varnish. But if somebody edited the page or published some new content or whatever, it might be a cache miss, and then Next will regenerate the page. So you can get the same editor experience you get in like normal WordPress, where your content is live within a few seconds. You can do that with headless WordPress and without overwhelming your server, right? So, and the network cache, I will call this out. The network cache stuff does have some opinionated implementation details that the host will have to implement. So we have the WPGraphQL Smart Cache, the GitHub repo. We have like a hosting guide in our docs for hosts that are interested in supporting it. WP Engine is the first one to, obviously, I'm employed here, so I helped work on it. it's nothing exclusive that other hosts can't support. We're the first ones that have put in the effort and time to get it to work.
Yep. So if you're listening, other hosts, hit us up. Get it working. Get it working.
There was a tweet by someone from GoDaddy, I think, is it GoDaddy, Jason, that they were asking about? I can't remember, but anyway.
Yeah, I demoed Scott Bollinger at GoDaddy.
That's right. Yeah,
I demoed it for him.
Yeah.
Cool. So let me hit up my second follow up there. So it must have been a couple of months ago now. We had on the folks from GraphCDN, right, who are, I guess, doing something kind of similar to what it sounds like GraphQL Smart Cache does. So, like, what do you see the differences between those two approaches being?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so they are pretty similar. One is that as a WP Engine customer or whatever host ends up supporting it, for now, WP Engine, you get it for free. You don't have to sign up for another service. So you get this benefit as a user. So that's one thing. The other thing, the way WP GraphQL Smart Cache tracks events is a lot more nuanced. So right now there's a lot of the like Stellate or GraphCDN or whatever.
Yeah, sorry, Stellate. I forgot they renamed
Stellate.
My bad. Sorry, Max.
Their plugin at the moment tracks stuff a lot more loosely, so it's going to lead to purging more often than it probably should. So you're going to have a lot more cache misses. Not that big of a deal. Like we actually built the Smart Cache plugin to work. Our goal is to have it work with like any caching client. So they should actually be able to use the Smart Cache plugin to evict their caches too.
Oh,
maybe with some tweaking. But the idea would be like ultimately, my goal is to ultimately get enough feedback and finesse this stuff that we can move actually a lot of the feature set into WP GraphQL core.
Okay.
For now, like it's easier to iterate in a separate plugin and get feedback and make breaking changes to the functionality versus doing it in a core plugin that has a lot more users. So it's technically a beta plugin right now.
Dude.
It's stable. I'm using it in production. We have production users using it, but we might make breaking changes to like function names or function signatures, or we might move stuff around. So the functionality should largely be the same, even if we break stuff under the hood. But we're still iterating on it as we get feedback from users. So.
And it seems to me like one of the key benefits of your approach is it really just like optimizes the issue in place. Like, right, we don't have to have this separate service. We don't have to change any endpoints on the front end. And it just like you install WP GraphQL Smart Cache and boom. You're what you had is now fast and doing pretty much, what that other service does.
Because see, Jeff, the thing is, that's the exact stoke that Rob from Deserto had with the plugin, because he was already on WPN. He's like, Fran, we just plug this thing in. I've been working with Jason and it works like too damn well. But anyway, but that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So he was stoked about that, the plugin, man.
Yeah, for sure. And for those of you who are looking for a really good use case of how this plugin sort of shines and what sort of magic it can work, listen to our previous episode with Rob from Desertos, where they talk about supporting a 60 million monthly page view site with Headless WordPress and, WP GraphQL Smart Cache. So,
yeah, super cool.
Yeah, cool. So let's see. Let's dig one layer deeper into kind of the functionality here. So we talked about kind of like the network cache at like the varnish layer. But so let's say that a host doesn't have that enabled. Are there still benefits that a user can get via like the object cache?
Yeah. So there's a couple situations, like if for the one you said, like if the host doesn't support like a network cache layer for it, or if your client application, for some reason, if you're not able to change it from post to GET requests, maybe you deployed a native iOS app and you can't just like go change it, right? Like users that have it downloaded, right? So like it's going to continue making post requests. until they update
Oh,
it or
wow.
whatever.
And that's a whole, I
Wait,
just thought about how difficult that would be.
Yeah.
Like to do that in production. How would you even, I don't want to think about that right now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
it's like, that's a crazy use case.
You have to wait for folks to like re-download the app or update it or whatever. So in that case, you can let's say that's the case. You have a client that, or maybe it's like some organization reason, like, sorry, we can't do this. Like we have to do post requests. Okay, cool, whatever. If you have to do post requests or your WordPress host doesn't support network cache layer, you can still do post requests, and WPGraphQL Smart Cache, it adds a settings page under like GraphQL settings. There's already settings there, but it adds a new tab called Cache tab. And so you can go to that tab, you can enable object cache. And what that does, it does the same thing that is happening at the network cache layer, but it does at the WordPress object cache layer. So again, this will maybe be dependent on your WordPress host. Most WordPress hosts that I know of have some sort of persistent object cache layer on the WordPress side. So that what that means is your request gets past any network cache layer like a varnish. It makes it to WordPress, but there's a cache layer there. It could be Memcache, or it could be Redis, or it could be something else, something similar to one of those technologies, where it'll check, oh, do I already have results for this thing you're asking for? And if so, I can return it before I have to execute a bunch of functions to get it. So the WP GraphQL Smart Cache has the object cache layer, so that if your request makes it all the way to WordPress, we'll check at that level. Is there cache response already there? It does still require WordPress to load, so it's not going to be as fast as the network caching. But I was helping a user just a couple of days ago get on it, and they were seeing like 700 millisecond responses, and then get reduced to like 150, 200 milliseconds.
Oh wow, that's very snappy.
Whoa.
So quite a bit faster. So
nice.
And it's going to depend on your queries and whatever, where like that tipping point is of like, if possible, I'm always going to recommend the network cache. It's going to save your WordPress server from a lot of execution. So if you can do it, use the network cache. If you can't, the object caching should still help. The invalidation logic is all the same. So your network cache should be getting evicted the same as your object cache. So if you're publishing posts, they both should be getting purged. You should have correct data the same way in both. You do just have to pay the price of WordPress still loading to be able to generate the response from the object cache. So,
okay.
And you said that would work with post requests out of the box, right? So you can just turn this on, click a button, and boom, you've got some acceleration out of the box.
Exactly. It should work. It should work with probably most existing applications out there today. You just enable it, give it a test. It should start working. There's possibly some gotchas there, like depending on your in-memory cache solution, or like your like Redis or Memcache or whatever, depending on how it's configured, stuff can like start falling out of the cache, like if it gets overpopulated.
Okay.
So you could have like mystery cache misses that you weren't like expecting, maybe content didn't change, but you just got a cache miss. It could be potentially due to like cache overpopulation.
Like keep the most recent 5 megabytes of cache data and whatever else just falls off. Okay.
But
and that's cool.
Still, and that happens already in normal WordPress environments already too. So.
I wonder how often, like from a use case perspective, since y'all have been utilizing WordPress longer than I have, is there more often than not developers and websites that have a kind of rule within their organizations? Oh, we cannot use GET request. We must use post.
No,
or you know what I'm saying? Okay.
I doubt it.
You should leave that organization. Like,
I'm kind of curious if there's like a hardcore use case that y'all ever came across where like, all right, it's like, dang.
No. I think Jason's example of the iOS app was a good one, because like once you have a bunch of decoupled clients, and like ideally you'd want them all to communicate in the same way, and supporting both may be difficult, and Like clearly, if you've got like an app out there that somebody has to take an action to change, or on the web, it's like you just refresh the page and all of a sudden you're getting the latest and greatest. So yeah, I think it would depend on like how you're actually delivering whatever app it is.
Okay.
But no,
Okay.
I've never encountered anybody being like, you have
that
to
hardcore. Yeah, it's like
get or post or something like that.
Yeah, it's probably not like a company policy or anything, but it could be due to other technical limitations. Like if let's say you have this app that's up and running, but you don't have good test coverage, right? Switching everything from post to get, that's like, oh shoot, I just changed everything in the app. Mm-hmm. What if one of those get requests? So that brings me to the next point, I guess, right? Get requests do have query string limitations, right? So
I want to see that gnarly query.
Me too. I kind of do too.
They're big, but like GraphQL queries, as you probably know, can get big too, especially if you're doing stuff like advanced custom fields, flex fields, for example, right?
Good point.
Where you have like you treat ACF like a page builder, and like each flex field group is a GraphQL type. So you have like these lists of types, and maybe, I've seen some where there's like hundreds of ACF field groups, right? So like I've seen queries do get pretty long. So there is query string limitations. So if let's say you had some of these big queries, if you switch everything from post to get, you might run into an issue where some of your queries fail because the query string is too long to send over a GET request. So that does bring us to the next point, though. We have a solution for that, which persisted queries. So that's WPGraphQL Smart Cache has a feature called persisted queries. This was, to my knowledge, it was kind of popularized by Apollo. Apollo's a company in the GraphQL space that has like a server components for building GraphQL servers in Node and JavaScript, and then it also has like client tools to consume GraphQL APIs. And Faust, our framework that we're working on at WP Engine, uses Apollo. The new version of Faust that we just launched, like last week or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's using Apollo. But yes, they popularized this idea of persisted queries. And what that means is the server can store a copy of a query document. So the big query string, instead of sending it every time, you can store it on the server once, and then it'll have an ID to reference it. And then you can do a GET request with that ID, and the server will look up the document, execute it for you, and return the response. So we have that feature set. You can enable, there's like a UI. The UI is very up in the air right now. Like, so if you do use this feature, just expect changes to the UIs over time. Like, don't go all in on it like it's some finished product. But if you do use it, you can enable it from the GraphQL settings page. There's a checkbox to show the UI, and it's GraphQL document post type in WordPress, where you can put GraphQL documents. You can put your queries. It'll generate an ID for you, and then you can do a GET request at your GraphQL endpoint. Instead of doing, like, when you do a normal GET request for a query, you do like, /GraphQL $query equals, and then your query string.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an ID for a query document, you do, /GraphQL $query ID equals. You pass the ID, then when the request makes it to the server, it looks up the document, executes the document. It works with variables too, so you could have a GraphQL query you could define a GraphQL query that needs variables, like the URI or an ID or whatever it might be. So you could have your document persisted on the server, use the ID, pass variables as well, and it'll execute. So that gets rid of the query string length limitations. And that feature, speaking of Apollo, they also on the client side, they have something called a persisted queries link. And so what that does, you can drop it into your Apollo client application. And the way that works, it tries to do a GET. So whatever query you write in your application, let's say you get to the point where you have this really long query, like the ACF example we were talking about. This Apollo link will take that query string, it will hash it to like a SHA-256 hash it will send a GET request with that hash to your server. If your server already has that query with that hash, it will execute and return the response. If it doesn't, the server responds with an error telling Apollo client, I don't have this query. So Apollo client, the persistent query link, takes the hash and the full query string, sends it as a post request to the server. Then the server stores it for future use. So now the server can have a copy of this document. So your client developers can go write their queries however they want for their application. And it basically syncs it to the WordPress server as these queries are executed. And then you can make use of GET requests for all your queries, basically. So it's a super cool workflow.
That's cool. It reminds me a lot of, I'm going to invoke like the .NET days where we would do like they called them stored procedures on SQL Server.
Okay.
And it reminds me a lot of that, where like I define this query maybe with variables and that lives on the server. And then I just sort of invoke it from my application. And it just kept the code so much cleaner. Really made sure that you weren't like modifying these queries all over the place. So there's a lot of cool parallels to that that I see with this feature.
Yeah. What's kind of cool, I think this would be maybe a cool experiment to try for somebody if they wanted to. Like the REST API, the WordPress REST API, like it's an endpoint that does some stuff and returns some data. Like it'd be interesting to see if we could reproduce like a similar experience with persistent queries, where like you just have a series of endpoints, like a post endpoint, but it's just a GraphQL query that generates a list of posts. Or like I think you could get pretty close to the same experience you get with
that'd be cool
with the REST API with
neat.
persistent queries.
So, and it's interesting. Jason,
I thought you were going to say, Jeff, you should make a .NET example of headless WordPress.
Do it.
I was like, no way.
Do it, Jeff. Oh,
bust out my C# skills.
Bro.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
Oh man, I was gonna ask about the layer of the Apollo client playing with Smart Cache, Jason, just for like our listeners and people that are going to, after the podcast, download the plugin and whatnot. Is there an actual, when say they're using Next.js on the front end and they have an apollo.js file for their Apollo instance in there, is there anything syntactically that you need to set up within the Apollo client to play well with this persistent queries and just WPGraphQL Smart Cache overall, or are you kind of Gucci from the start?
Yeah, so it is. You do have to add the support for the if you're doing automated persistent queries, at least you do. There's the automated persistent queries link from Apollo. If you go to WPGraphQL.com is a headless Next.js front end. It's on GitHub. It's all open source, so you could go to github.com/wp-graphql/wpgraphql.com. And in there, you can see my Apollo config for how I have it set up. So I have it configured to do GET requests for queries. So there's like an option in Apollo, use GET for queries. I set that to true. So that means all my queries from my next app are going to use GET requests. And then I set up the persistent queries link so that it does that workflow we just talked about, where it tries to do a GET request. If it doesn't succeed, it does a post request with the full document and the query ID. And then in the future, it keeps doing GET requests. And so I have that all set up, and you can steal that if you.
And what happens with that with Apollo is you're actually just using it as a fetch engine or a mechanism rather than using its own cache, because it has its own layer. But I get it. Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you could. So you can cache in Apollo. You could turn it to network only cache if you wanted, and let the like your network cache be the cache. There's still benefits. There can be benefits of like caching stuff on Apollo, because even if you can prevent Apollo from needing to talk to your server at all, even if it is a cache response from Varnish, it's still better. There's nuance to it though, right? Like if you're not talking to your server, how do you know when things change, right? So like it's kind of up to you and what you're building. Like there's fetch policies in Apollo you can explore. Depending on what you're doing, you might be safest at the moment if you have a network cache in your WordPress host. you might be safe to set it to network only, your cache policy in Apollo, because then it'll hit varnish whenever it tries to get data. Okay. It'll get cache from the server. If it's fresh data, then it will, expose that. But it really just depends on what you're building, though.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry, this is me, and I meant to sort of ask this question back when we were talking about the network cache. But how long does that stuff stay cached in the network cache? Are there settings for that?
Yeah. So there is actually one setting. So the Smart Cache plugin under the cache tab in the settings, there is like a max age that you can set.
Okay.
For all queries. The default, I think WPGraphQL sets the default for all queries to be 600 seconds. So any query you make tells the response has a header that says, hey, cache me for 600 seconds. Most hosts are going to respect that. You can override that from the settings page. So you could set it higher or lower. Like if you want all your stuff to be cached for 24 hours or whatever you want, you can set it from there. And then persistent queries, you can also override the value, the max age at a per query level as well. So like, let's say you wanted all of your stuff to be cached for 24 hours, but maybe you wanted your homepage to be cached for just 5 minutes or whatever. Obviously, all these things are going to be purged when events happen, or they should be.
Yeah.
In the event that maybe you are querying for data that isn't being tracked, like maybe you have fields you expose from a plugin that maybe uses custom database tables or something like that, then we, like WPGraphQL Smart Cache, isn't going to know about your custom thing. Mm-hmm. So it might not be tracking when that custom data changes. So in those events, you might want to put a TTL or like a max age of the cache so that even if an event doesn't clear the cache, it will be cleared automatically at some point in time.
Okay.
So
I got to tell you guys that, and it's totally okay because I did ask the developer on the call when I was with Jason and Mark Kellner helping, that I mentioned their name on the podcast, but he didn't want to get on. But Clutch Points and Cavs Nation is actually moving toward full headless. They're main.com, but their Cavs Nation website, Jason got on a call and I was able to observe. And y'all, I'm telling you this right now. It's not because I work at WP Engine or whatever, because I also not only watching it on a Cavs Nation website, a sports website that's used by a lot of people, but my own. The way Jason and Mark has set up this plugin to invalidate the cache, especially if you're using ISR with Next.js, to get that fresh, snappy, up-to-date data when you hit publish on the WordPress end, and then it just like the response is so quick once it's insane. It's so good. I got so stoked because the dev on the call for Clutch Points was like, you know what? I'm just going to push this to prod. I'm just going to push this to prod right now. And Jason's like, oh, cool. All right. All right. This guy ain't effing around. All right.
Go for it. Go for it.
So anyway.
They are cavalier.
Yeah, they're cavalier.
Yeah,
that's my one fun. Bad joke for the day.
Yeah, we hopped on a call. I was just going to demo them the feature, and like in a span of 30 minutes, I demoed it. He installed it, activated it, pushed to prod, verified that it was working in prod, all within like a 30-minute call. I was like, all right, cool. It's working.
Yeah, that is cool. That is cool. Yeah, and I think, and we've touched on cache invalidation and what it does a lot. And I think that was kind of our next question. So is there anything else you think we missed there? Like how it works with the host? I think,
one thing I wanted to ask Jason, because I'm kind of curious at the end of the README as I was like engrossed and enthralled in his docs for the past 2 weeks, because trying to write up my own blog post about it with these many layers of it. What I'm kind of wondering, like, Jay, what, like in the future, what do you see as far as use cases? At the end of the README, it says, hey, reach out to us devs if you have any ideas about custom functionality and what you want to extend on Smart Cache.
Oh, sure.
Do you have any top ideas that devs have come to you so far yet about anything? You know what I'm saying? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, actually, okay. So here's like one of the gotchas with cache and cache invalidation, actually. So GraphQL obviously makes it really flexible to fetch a lot of stuff and a lot of different things, right? So WP GraphQL by default like caps your queries at like 150 things. Like, so if you query for a list of posts, like we cap at 100, and then we recommend you do a paginated request. So you do like one request for 100, another request for 100. Some folks like will filter it and like allow you to query like 1,000 things in one request. The thing with cache invalidation, though, is the more nodes that are returned in a request, anytime those nodes are edited, that it's going to cause that cache to be evicted. So if you're returning 1,000 nodes, and you have 50 content editors, the chances of them editing one of those 1,000 nodes is high. So anytime somebody edits one of those, it's going to evict the cache. So like so Dexerto actually found this, like their homepage, they're querying a lot of posts in one request. And obviously it's the most recent posts that have been published on the homepage. So anytime if you look at their homepage, they got, dozens of content creators. So anytime one of those content creators goes and edits a typo on one of those posts, or posts an update to it, or adds a picture, or, tweaks a caption, or, like whatever they're doing, those actions are going to evict the cache. So that I think you said this earlier. He said, "Oh, it's working too good."
It's
right?
too good.
So one of the things we worked with them, and there might be some finessing still to happen there, but the idea is like you can have like a middle ground of the cache invalidation strategy. By default, the cache invalidation, like I mentioned, it's gonna purge caches. If you edit a post or a page or a user or whatever it is, if you edit a node or an object, it's gonna call purge on that ID. So anything in the cache that was tagged with that ID will be evicted. So if I have my homepage that has 100 posts, any of those 100 posts gets edited, the homepage is going to be evicted. So what you can do, like you can filter the headers that are returned in the GraphQL query. Yeah. So like let's say their cache strategy would be like, instead of evicting the cache for any edit to any of the 100 posts, maybe they only wanted to evict when one of the top 10 posts was evicted. Like maybe if it was one of the top 100, but maybe it was published yesterday or whatever, we can let it ride out for 5 minutes for natural expiration, right? If it's one of the top 5 or 10 posts, if that's edited, let's purge the cache. So you can filter the headers that are tagged, which your network cache will tag, or the object cache will tag the query with. So you have control, like filters and stuff, where you can override some of the defaults to play nice for your for your situation. So like scenarios like that is, I guess, what I'm looking for. Like Dexerto helped us identify that, like, we're caching accurate, or we're invalidating the cache accurately, but it might be more than they wanted. The other strategy, though, they could potentially just have smaller queries on their homepage that says,
I was waiting for this.
I was going to say,
I've got to make my tech Twitter drama joke about having 1,000 RPC calls to load a homepage here.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So this might be if you got a sufficient cache, make those 1,000 RPC calls.
Yeah, but it's all a balance, right? Like a lot more smaller queries versus one big query. Like there is a balance. At one point, like too many requests is going to be painful. But like one big request is also going to be painful. So trying to find that balance in what works for you and what works for your users. But like, I think
that's a good find, though, as far as Dexerto and like devs in the community, because I think getting more granular on how they want to evict what is definitely wouldn't only be the use case, Jason, for that. Like they brought this up to you, but I think more people would use it on their own sites and whatnot.
Some other use cases too is like we track a lot of events that happen in WordPress, but there might be stuff that like you're like, oh, how'd you miss this? Or like there's this common event that happens, like, but it's not being tracked. Like, why not? Like those kind of stuff. If you're doing something and you're noticing that stuff isn't evicting the way you would think it is or should be, like that's the kind of stuff we want to learn more about that. If it's from a custom plugin, you're probably going to have to write some code to get the two things to work together, or encourage the plugin developer to help you or whatever. But
and now is kind of my next question. So like when you say custom plugin, do you mean like some of the popular like WP GraphQL add-ons are probably going to need a little bit of custom massaging?
Potentially. Yeah,
Okay.
it could happen at that level. Or I don't know if you're using, I don't know, any plugin that adds data to WordPress that you can get back out in GraphQL. It might there is a good chance you are using GraphQL extension for it already. But if you're not, like maybe you registered a GraphQL field yourself to expose data from a plugin. Maybe that plugin is storing data not in a post type or post meta. Maybe it's storing it in a custom table or something. If it is stored outside of like core data constructs in WordPress, we probably can't track the event.
Okay.
So there is a chance. Like Gravity Forms, for example. There is a Gravity Forms for the WP GraphQL for Gravity Forms extension. Yep. Gravity Forms uses custom tables, right? And so like the Smart Cache plugin can't automatically, I mean, we can't find all these different plugins and how they do custom data. We could, right? We're not going to, right?
Yeah.
Because there's tens of thousands of WordPress.
Yeah, you can't do that to yourself, man.
So like the Gravity Forms, WP GraphQL for Gravity Forms, probably at some point, I imagine, will do the magic for you that listens to how data changes in Gravity Forms and call a purge event in the same way that we do for core WordPress actions. In the meantime, I doubt it's their highest priority right now.
Yeah,
the plugin maintainer. So you might need to do that for your own site and kind of bridge the two things, or open a PR to WP GraphQL Gravity Forms or whatever.
Yeah,
David, who maintains that, is stellar, man. I think he knows more about WP GraphQL than I do. So
yeah, he's pretty awesome.
He's awesome.
Has he been on the podcast?
No, we should ask him.
We should ask him.
I found this on the web.
Oh,
Sorry,
thanks, Siri. Yeah.
We've got 1 minute. Jay, I got to ask this. This is Fran's fun question.
I need to know too.
Because I need to know, because you're the man who made me go out and buy an air fryer with your tweets about air fried pizza. But air fried pizza is not the only thing that you eat out of your air fryer. What are your top 5 air fried foods?
Top 5.
Yeah, top 5, man.
Well, pizza is obviously the best. So the secret to pizza, in my opinion, like, go order your pizza and eat it just like from the restaurant, but order some extra, keep it left over, toss a few slices in the next day. Man, Costco leftover pizza in the air fryer pizza is amazing.
Yeah, Kirkland pizza, brothers.
So there's that. Fries are pretty good. You can reheat fries. Like fries usually
reheated
stink
fries.
if you reheat them. Like you can't microwave fries. Are you kidding me? You can toss them in the air fryer and they reheat pretty good. So you got fries. I've done a whole chicken in there. You take a whole chicken, season it up, toss it in the air fryer. Hot wings. Yeah, hot wings are super good.
Oh, good call. I didn't think of that. I'm gonna do that tonight.
Let's see. Oh, I haven't tried it yet, but I'm probably gonna do it right after this call. I got a bunch of corn tortillas in my fridge. I'm gonna cut them up, air fry them, make corn chips.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, that would be good.
Tortilla chips, whatever.
Oh man, there y'all. Follow Jason Bahl for more life hacks, y'all.
Yeah,
I'll tweet a picture of these chips when
please do, because I'm kind of because after I'm done I'm going to the grocery store and I want to try the chicken that you just I didn't even think of chicken or wings to throw in there.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
Wings are good.
They come out really good, don't they?
Yeah. Oh yeah, the wings are awesome.
You got to experiment with it, see what works for you. Like I like my wings a little more crispy, so like sometimes it takes a little while to get them there.
Yeah.
Well, I pat my wings dry with a paper towel and then put a little. What is it? I always mix them up. It's either baking powder or baking soda. I forget which one.
It's probably powder.
I have it in my kitchen. I can't remember which one it is.
Cleaning?
But you sprinkle a little bit of it's not the Arm & Hammer yellow box,
dude.
It's the other one.
I think that's soda.
Baking soda.
Yeah, I think Arm & Hammer is baking soda.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, then it's the other one, baking powder.
Baking powder. Okay.
you sprinkle a little bit on the wings, and it helps kind of keep the moisture out, and then they get a little more crispy.
Nice. Okay. Sweet. There you have it. Jason's top 5 air fried foods.
Yeah.
Jason, thanks for coming on, man, and explaining
really appreciate
everything about this. Was a good podcast, and I think it's a game changer. The plugin's a game changer, and once it just gets more use and iteration on it, it's going to be excellent for the community and everything. So I appreciate you, man.
Yeah. So if you're looking for more information, then you can find me I'm on Twitter still, one of the few left, I guess. Twitter, my handle's at Jason Bahl, BAHL, and then also at WPGraphQL on Twitter. And then github.com/WP-GraphQL. You'll find a bunch of repos there, including the Smart Cache repo, the core WPGraphQL repo. WPGraphQL is on the WordPress.org repo. Some of the extensions are not, so you got to go to GitHub for those still.
Cool.
Yeah. And then obviously WPGraphQL.com. You can find information about all this stuff there too.
Yeah. And we'll definitely leave a bunch of links in the podcast description and stuff.
100%. Cool.
Well,
all right.
Rock on, y'all.
All right.
Thanks again.
Jason. Later.
See y'all.
Thanks for tuning in to the Headless WP podcast. If you liked today's episode, go ahead and give us a share or a like on whatever platform you're listening on. And be sure to keep in touch with the WP Engine Developer Relations team on Twitter, Discord, or through our website. Thanks for listening.